Slater Crusaders. America's the greatest country in the world. Glad you're here for another week of no one has any idea what to do about anything, because we don't know anything about anything still. But I'm glad you're here. We're going to do the best we can to make sense of it. We got Vincent Racaniello coming up. He's a professor of virology at Columbia University. He's like the expert on viruses, and I just can't wait to talk to him. We talked to him on Friday, and I have a ton more questions from this weekend. And I'd so much rather do that than whatever the stupid mainstream media is talking about. Stupidness nonstop. It's so freaking frustrating. And I get annoyed at it because then I get distracted having to debunk their stupidness. Just here, watch this clip. You've seen it by now, but watch the clip again. Here, watch it. There it is.
So I ask Bill a question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting. So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant.
Oh, what
knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number in the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful.
Oh, the president says everyone needs to drink bleach. You heard it, didn't you hear it? He said it right there. You got to drink bleach. This is so stupid. I'm actually glad this happened, though, in a way, because now you can tell who the hacks are versus the actually serious people. So it's actually a good thing to do every once in a while. The serious people try to understand. Serious people are curious, which is why coming up we're going to talk to a professor of an Ivy League university about viruses to try and understand, right? So if you were a serious person, you would hear the president say that, and you'd say, oh, I wonder what he's talking about exactly. Like what treatment, like I wonder what UV light does exactly. What kind of disinfectants are you talking about? Like I'm curious. As opposed to ABC News' John Carl immediately following that said, are you suggesting people ingest isopropyl alcohol? Isopropyl alcohol, what are you talking about? This is Scott Adams. He said there's a massive IQ test on the internet today. If you think the president was asking Dr. Birx about injecting bleach or isopropyl alcohol into coronavirus patients because it sounded that way to you, you failed the test. Listen, the president was musing. He was up there musing. Now, should the president be musing from the podium? I don't know, maybe not. But criticize him for that if you want. Don't go out of your way to tell people the president is telling people to drink Lysol. You know what I heard from the president? I heard him say, you know, I find this to be interesting. And he told, are you going to test that, right? We're going to test that? Oh, great. Yeah, we're going to test it. That sounds really interesting. He said it'd be interesting to check that out. I mean, using medical doctors, but man, that sounds interesting to me. We'll see. He said interesting literally 4 times. I said, wow, that'd be interesting. I don't know, maybe. But test that out. You know, doctors, test that out. That'd be interesting. I hope that, you know, maybe there's not. Right, he's just being hopeful. He's musing about potential progress for different treatments. Yeah, perhaps inartfully. And again, you could say that the president should be doing that. That's fine. But don't go telling people that the president says you should shoot Lysol into your veins. I see this as clear as day. Now, I'm totally making this up, right? But can't you see Trump and all the medical experts around the table right before the press conference? And he says, all right, everyone, give me some good news. Everyone, all his medical experts here, he's like, give me some good news. I need something to tell the people some good news. And some doctor or medical advisor says, well, Mr. President, there's actually some promising news about UV light. So first of all, outside, the sun may decrease the prevalence of the virus. But there's also this device. Do we have a video of this? There's this device from, and we'll talk about this coming up in a little bit actually, from Cedars-Sinai, that is this catheter device that you can actually put down your throat into your lungs, and it emits UV light and kills viruses on contact. So maybe one of his advisors was like, hey, there's actually this interesting device called Heal Light, And it could actually maybe really help people and kind of give the immune system a little jump because it knocks the virus down so the immune system kind of catches up. And that's really good. And Trump says, oh, wow, that's interesting. Good. All right, who else here has some good news? And someone said, well, Mr. Trump, we actually have some great news about disinfectants and the ability of disinfectants to kill viruses on lab surfaces. But maybe there's some way we can have some different disinfectants administered by doctors inside the body as well, which would be a real game changer. So we're really excited about that. And the president says, wow, that's two great news stories. Can't wait to go tell the people about it. And then he does, and everyone freaks out at him. So the UV part. So listen, I know very little about this, but from 11th grade science class, there's 3 UV lights, A, B, and C. C barely makes it into the atmosphere, but it's the most harmful because you can get it from like welding light. UVB is, I think, just stays on the surface of your skin, and that's like what gives you a skin cancer or a sunburn. But then UVA, I think, don't quote me on this if there's some like light expert watching right now. UVA can actually penetrate the skin. And I believe that's the kind that kills viruses. So if doctors with this device from Cedars-Sinai can just isolate the UVA light in a very particular way from LED lights, then it could kill viruses directly on contact inside the body, as we just showed from that video right there. This is an AP News story from April 20th. AP News from April 20th. This isn't like years and years ago. This is last week, like a couple days before this whole thing happened. He said, where is it? I2 Bioscience signs exclusive global license with Cedars-Sinai for potential coronavirus treatment. It was a week ago. And it's about that Heal Light thing. The Cedars-Sinai, biomedical company, specifically for corona, UV light. Exactly what the president was talking about. But if you defend the president, then you're the idiot, and the Trump's the idiot. But you attacking the president and being ignorant, I don't mean that rudely, but being ignorant about this potential device and this potential treatment, you're somehow the holier-than-thou, super smug, self-righteous genius in the situation because you don't know about this potential UV light treatment, and I'm the idiot for, ridiculous. Just for kicks, here's another video of a robot that can disinfect a hospital room in 15 minutes without using any chemicals. Thing just zips around the room, shooting UV light all over the place and kills, viruses and whatever else. So that's exciting too. So UV light works, and that's all the president was musing about. Then the second thing was about injecting a disinfectant. First of all, there's a difference between injecting and ingesting. Okay, people are like drinking bleach. It's like, well, no, the president didn't say anything of the sort, but he certainly didn't talk about ingesting. Also, a disinfectant, the dictionary definition of disinfectant is a chemical that destroys forms of harmful microorganisms. So it's something that can kill a virus on contact with a medical doctor, as the president said. And maybe there's some treatment out there that instead of being taken in a pill, can be applied directly in the lungs. I have an application for a patent here. It says chlorine dioxide gas for use in treating respiratory virus infections. So chlorine dioxide gas would be a disinfectant, and it's used for treating respiratory virus infections, which COVID is, and maybe it could work for that. Right? No one, it's chlorine dioxide gas. If the president said, hey, I have a patent here, and there's interesting treatment about chlorine dioxide gas, would the media come back and be like, oh, the president told everyone to go to your local YMCA, break into the chemicals cabinet, and drink chlorine tablets? No, he didn't. How much of a Trump derangement syndrome do you have to take something that the president says, which is a potentially hopeful thing in an inquisitive tone, and say, oh, he held up a sign saying you need to drink chlorine. He's so dangerous. What an idiot. Man, I was so discouraged. When was the last time this happened? Oh, what was the last dumb thing like this? It wasn't Charlottesville. That was a long time ago. But there was another recent one. I saw it, and I was like, oh, the media is going to say this about it. And then right away, the media just totally spun it exactly how we all knew they would. And it's similar here. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, people are going to say that he didn't. And it was discouraging because there's otherwise smart and pretty reliable good people who fell for this media hoax, and that's all this was. I see all these headlines about, I saw these other headlines about, like the head of Lysol says, don't drink Lysol. And it was framed as like, oh, the head of Lysol says Trump's an idiot. And it's like, well, no, the guy had to say something because the media kept going to the head of Lysol and saying, should people drink Lysol? The president says people should drink Lysol. Should you drink Lysol? And he had to get the head of Lysol to be like, no. No, even the head of Lysol is against Trump. Absurd. Okay, I'm done. I'm done with that. So stupid. Let's take it as a good thing that this happened. Because I have my Twitter feed and I try to curate people and sources best I can. And anyone who fell for that, it's sad, but you know that they're too biased, they have too much Trump derangement syndrome, and they're not curious. And if they're not curious in a time of uncertainty like this, I'm not interested. Coming up next, in that vein, which are filled with Lysol bleach, because clearly you injected Lysol into your veins this weekend. By the way, I don't believe any of those stories either about, an increase in calls to poison control for people drinking Clorox. I guarantee you those are all trolls. But I did read one article, and it's in the New York Post or something, and it said there were 13 more calls to poison control than the same period last year. And I thought, geez, are people always drinking bleach? Like that means last year, people were just drinking bleach randomly all the time too. But I don't believe any stories about upticks in it all. Anyway, coming up, Professor of Virology at Columbia University. I got a ton of questions for him. We'll do that next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. In the name of being curious, which is what we all need to be. We need to be humble and have grace and be curious in this time of, at least for most of us, absolute uncertainty. I'm so grateful for Vincent Racaniello. He's a professor of virology at Columbia University. His Ivy League course is available for free on YouTube, which is crazy. So you can watch that. And he's given us some of his time right here for me to ask all my stupid questions. Professor, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Really glad you're here. So I've been writing down questions all weekend. So let me start here. What is the difference between a virologist, first of all, is that what you are first? And then a virologist, an epidemiologist, a phylogeneticist, and whatever. And you can go through those, but also like, what are their mental models? Like, how do they think about the world, people in these different professions? And what are the limitations of what an epidemiologist might know versus what a virologist might know? And I ask that because I want to know not only who to listen to, but like how to weigh what different professors and smart people are saying. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, total. Good question, and I'll answer it. Just remember that there's a little bit of overlap always. So what I do, I'm a virologist. I study viruses. I study what they do in cells and animals and sometimes in people. Okay, I want to understand how they work, basically. When it comes to viruses spreading in big populations, right? The world, like this one, is spreading. That's what an epidemiologist does. They look at how many people are infected. They try to predict how many people are going to get infected. They try and predict how long the outbreak will be. They use a lot of mathematical modeling. And, I can sort of understand what they're talking about, but that's not my thing. And they can lose me really quickly, okay? But they are really important for saying, when do you think this is going to be over? And then once it's over, look at all the numbers and say how many people are infected and what can we expect. And then you have clinicians, of course, who take care of sick people. And they have a different language and they do different things. Sometimes there's a little bit of overlap. What else did you ask about? Those are the three main ones.
Well, I had phylogeneticists. That's
Okay.
one thing that I've become new with.
Good. So a phylogeneticist studies the relationships between organisms. In the old days, you used to go out and look at animals and measure them and weigh them and then make a phylogenetic tree on how they're related to one another, squirrels and mice and rats and humans and so forth. Now, though, we can do their DNA sequences, and we use that to relate them to one another, use computer programs to take all the DNA sequences. We have many, many thousands of DNA sequences of humans, of everything that lives on the planet. And you can have a computer align them and say who's related to what. You can do the same thing with viruses. You can take virus sequences as they come out of people, and say how they're related. And so that's what a phylogeneticist does. They look at those sequences and tell you how they're related, how long they've been circulating. You can tell how long this virus has been circulating, for example, if anything interesting is happening. And I can understand a lot of what they talk about as well, although when they start talking about their computer programs, I get lost.
Yeah. So I read one phylogeneticist report out of Connecticut, and they did that tree that you mentioned, and I think their conclusion was they traced a Connecticut outbreak back to Washington. So I saw that, Washington State, and I saw that, and my first question was, how accurate is that science? Is that 100% accurate because we're dealing with RNA, or is it we're just kind of guessing, doing the best we can?
So what those scientists do, they make the best guess. So they take 100, say, virus sequences, and they do pairwise comparisons. They take 1 and 2, they take 1 and 3, 1 and 4, all the way down, all possible combinations, and they say, what are the two most identical, say? And so it's pretty good confidence. It's never 100%. And in this study you just cited, what they do is they look at certain markers in the virus genome, and they can tell that they originated in certain parts of the country and how they spread. That's a very nice way of looking at that. I talked to a guy in Germany who had sequenced the virus from the throat and the lung of a patient, and they could tell they differ very slightly. They have markers that the ones transmitted to other patients came from the throat and not the lung, and they can tell that by the little markers in the sequence. Yeah.
Wow, and you trust that with pretty good certainty when you see those reports?
Absolutely.
Okay, wow. How generally, in times of peace and normalcy, how much do these different professions talk to each other? Because you mentioned different languages. How well did they talk to each other in the past, and how well or poorly are these people talking to each other now?
Well, right now it's unprecedented talking. I've found, I have a show of my own, and I found I can call anybody up and they'll come on, even though my show is about viruses. It's pretty obscure. And I think before then, people would say, I'm busy, I can't do it right now, right? So virologists, epidemiologists, phylogeneticists, we all publish in the same places, so we talk to each other. Sometimes we go to the same meetings, but I tell you something, there are meetings for virologists and there are meetings for epidemiologists. And when you want to do something different at your virology meeting, you invite an epidemiologist to give a talk and you see what they're doing. So there is crosstalk, but now more than ever. This has been an unprecedented thing, and I hope it continues, frankly.
Yeah, good. We need that. And I should have mentioned before, I'm sorry, Professor, everyone, the professor hosts a podcast called This Week in Virology, 12 years strong now, so you can definitely tune into that. Okay, can you give us some science, Professor, on how, from a viral, like nano level, how different treatments work? I mean, we did a very elementary segment a while back on how washing your hands work, like how soap attacks a viral, like the outside of a virus, right? But can you give us a little more insight into how different medicines might attack and kill a virus?
Okay, so we have, I would say, 3 categories of medicines that we're testing, some existing ones, and we're developing new ones. And the one maybe a lot of people recognize are vaccines, right? You take the virus and you modify it in some way so it doesn't make people sick, and you give it to them, they make an immune response, and then they're protected. And we have lots of vaccines against polio, measles, influenza, many, many other viruses. And so I think over 70 companies are right now making vaccines. The way they work is you most likely inject them, typically into your arm muscle, or sometimes they can be sprayed in your nose. There's a vaccine for flu called Flu Mist that's sprayed in your nose. And that one, the virus has been debilitated, so it doesn't make you sick, but it multiplies in you and it gives you immunity, so you're protected. The one you inject in your arm is killed or inactivated, and your body still reacts to it. And in both cases, you're making what we call antibodies. These are proteins that circulate within you. If you get infected with the virus, they will clamp down on it and eliminate it, so you're protected. And so that's the vaccine. Then we have antivirals. So vaccines are great because they can protect you before you get sick. So, you get a vaccine and you're protected for X years, 10, 20 years, whatever it may be. Now, let's say you're not vaccinated and you get sick, then you could get an antiviral. An antiviral will work after you've already been infected. It's typically a drug of some kind, and Tamiflu is a famous antiviral against influenza. Acyclovir is a herpes antiviral. These are little molecules that you typically take as a pill, and then they circulate within you for a short period of time, a month or two maybe. And then if you're infected, that will knock out the virus. It will go in, the drug will go into cells and it will stop the virus from multiplying. And so slowly,
Certain
if you
types
have
of viruses or
yeah,
any
you know,
type of virus?
they tend to be very specific for each virus. So acyclovir is specific for herpes simplex virus, and Tamiflu is specific for influenza virus. The nature of viruses is that we can't make one antiviral that hits them all. It would be great if we had that, but we don't have that. And so each virus has to have a separate one. And so a lot of people are making those kind of drugs for coronavirus right now. And
is that
we're also,
remdesivir and a couple of these other antivirals? Is that the hope that maybe those other antivirals helped with corona?
right. So remdesivir, it's a tough name.
Yeah, I'm never get it right. Never get it right.
It's okay.
I gave up on HC. I just call it HCQ now. Like I'm not even close to getting hydroxychloroquine.
We know what you mean. We know what you mean. Remdesivir was actually developed for Ebola virus years ago, and it didn't work, so it was put on the shelf. And then a few years ago, people pulled it out and said, let's try it against SARS-1 and MERS, and it worked. So now they pulled it out, and they're trying it against SARS-CoV-2. And there are a few other drugs that are being tested. You know, anything that's approved for use in humans by the FDA, for example, you should test against this virus because who knows? Sometimes it works.
Yeah.
So I would call that
if I can go one step, ask you to go one step deeper. So it goes into the cell and prevents the virus from replicating inside the cell. Is that how these work? These antivirals?
Right. That's right. So these drugs you take, they go in your stomach, they get in your bloodstream, and then they get into your cells where the virus is replicating and they block it. So the companies who make these have to test that ahead of time to make sure after you take it orally, it gets into cells. Obviously, that's a big deal, and it's not automatic that any drug is going to do that. So yeah, they'll get into cells and block. So if this virus is growing in your lung cells, this drug will get in theory, and block them. So those are antivirals. And a ton of those are being developed, brand new ones for this virus in case these repurposed ones don't work.
Okay. Third option.
So the third option is there are two sub-options, if you will. And this is to take those antibodies that we make against viruses and use them. So some people who have recovered from SARS-CoV-2 infection can take their serum out, and it's got antibodies in it. You can give it to someone else. That's called convalescent plasma therapy. That's been used for ages, and you can protect people from infection. So if they're already infected, you can give them someone else's antibodies. Those antibodies will clamp down on the viruses as they're floating around in your respiratory tract and even in your blood, and they'll block them from infecting. That's not a
hard
great
to scale.
Yeah, you can't scale that, obviously. It's very tough to scale. For scaling, what you do is you can take the cells out of someone's body that actually make those antibodies. They're called B cells. You can take out B cells and pull out the gene for the antibody and make it in a cell in industrial quantities. And you can definitely scale that up. And then we have what we call antibody therapy or monoclonal antibody therapy. And many companies are doing that for SARS-CoV-2. So that could work as well. It'd be like sort of like an antiviral, but it's a bigger kind of drug. And you'd have to inject that into your vein. You can't take that in a pill. So it's a little more serious.
Okay, I got to take a quick break. So we got like 1 minute. Are any of the antivirals, either the ones that already exist or are being developed, are any of them you find particularly promising?
So the only one I think is promising is remdesivir because in cells in the laboratory it looked really good. But so far the preliminary results in patients is not looking so good, but that would be the one I had the most hope for.
Okay. Okay, can you stick around, Professor, for one more second?
Of course. You bet.
Okay, Professor Racanello, This Week in Viruses. Download that podcast and listen to that. It's what we're living in right now. So let's all pretend to not only be armchair epidemiologists, which I've been pretending to be for the last 2 months, but a virologist as well. More coming up. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I got more questions for Professor Vincent Racanello from Columbia University, Professor of Virology. And I misspoke earlier. His podcast is called This Week in Virology. Please check that out. Professor, I'm sorry, we've talked a couple times now, and I haven't really asked you your general demeanor, your general posture about COVID and everything this world is facing with it. Where's your head at on the scale of this is no big deal to it's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing? Where are you there?
Well, I think I'm somewhere in between because, as you know, we've known since the beginning, 80% of the infections are pretty mild. But it's that 20% we worry about, and many of those people end up going in the hospital. And really, everyone needs to understand the main reason we're shutting down is to keep those people out of the hospital, because hospitals can't take a surge beyond their capacity, right? And we've seen that happen in countries like Italy, where they get overwhelmed and they can't care for people and they die. So we're trying to keep the numbers in the hospital down. We don't have enough personal protective equipment. We don't have enough ICU beds and respirator and ventilators and so forth. That's the main reason. So this isn't a virus that kills 80% of people, which Ebola virus can do. So it's a good thing it's not that. It's not completely mild like common cold viruses. So somewhere in between. And I'm going to say right now, one day, I would say in 4 or 5 years, this virus will be forgotten. Any vaccines we have, we won't need anymore. It'll just be a mild common cold virus. But you heard it here first.
Why do you say that? Yeah, why do you say that?
So there are 4 other coronaviruses like this one that cause very mild colds every winter. And people get them over and over again. The first time you get it as a kid, you don't get sick. As we know from this virus, kids don't get sick very often from coronaviruses. And then as you get older, your immunity wanes and you get sick. You get infected again, but you don't get sick. And that happens for the rest of your life. You don't even notice you've got infected. That's the modus of this particular virus. And all 4 of those coronaviruses emerged hundreds of years ago, probably from bats. And they probably caused an epidemic, but we didn't know it because we didn't have any medicine or epidemiology or phylogeneticists, as you say.
Yeah.
And this is just another one of those. It's starting out. It's going to infect most of the world. And once most people are infected, then people will get reinfected, won't get sick. There won't be any serious infections. So that's what I think will happen. But it'll take a couple of years, obviously.
Okay, so you mentioned this last week, and I told people about it, and then I was like, oh, I needed to ask for clarification because I'm nowhere near understanding. You said that, because I asked about immunity and how long immunity will last. And you said something like, you'll have immunity, but for a little period of time, you could get it again, but the second time you get it, you won't be sick. Is that right?
That's exactly right. That's what we're saying. The second and third and fourth,
Really?
you're probably going to get it over and over through your lifetime. But after that first infection, you're not going to get sick. And maybe you didn't get sick after the first one anyway, right? But these people who are in hospital, the ones that recover, they will probably get infected again in a couple of years. They won't get sick because you have just enough defenses to prevent you from getting sick. Not to prevent you from getting infected, but it will prevent you. And that's what we see with these seasonal common cold coronaviruses. That's why we're saying this.
Oh, so the nuance here is so fascinating because, at first, when I was learning all this, it's once you get immunity, you're good to go. And then it's like, no, once you get immunity, you may not be good forever. And then it's, oh, you can get it again. Oh, no, you can get sick multiple times. And now you're telling me you could get it again, but not get sick a second time. So that seems to be good news, right?
Well, as you say, it's nuanced. Yes, for this virus, that's the pattern. For other viruses, like measles, you get it once and you never get infected the rest of your life. So viruses are different in that sense. And then flu, of course, you get it, you make antibodies, and then flu changes. So you get infected again. It changes every year. So every virus is slightly different. But for the coronas, this is what we think. Infected many times, but no disease after the first time.
Wow. Now, second time you get it, could you be a spreader of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, I believe you could. I think that's the strategy, if you will, for this virus. Cause a lot of asymptomatic, mild infections, and that's how it spreads through the population, yeah.
Okay, read a study. I don't know if it was a study. It wasn't a study. I take that back. People throw that word around loosely. Looked at some results out of France. I don't trust anything out of China, and some results, I think, New York City, about smokers. And I'm sort of ballparking these numbers, but like smokers in France are like 25% of the population, but only 4% of COVID patients. So obviously, instinct, I think, obvious would be if you smoke, you're going to have bad lungs and you're going to die more likely, not way less likely. So A, have you seen anything about that? Or is this the first? I'm sure you've heard of that, right? So what do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, usually, as you say, we think people who smoke, they damage their lungs, so they're more susceptible to infections. And if you look at careful studies that are published, right, in the journals, that's what you see. Smokers have higher incidences of infections of the lungs and other lung diseases as well. So if you're telling me that they're having fewer infections, I wouldn't really buy that unless I see the data and it's in a journal article, because it doesn't make sense to me, right? Unless the smokers, see, the problem with saying you smoke and you have less COVID. What else are these people doing? Maybe smokers stay inside. I don't know. There are all kinds of other factors that could, we call these confounding factors, right? They could affect it. So you really need to sort those out. And that's the problem with stuff you hear in the news, right? It's not sorted out. You don't know if other things are affecting what they see.
Yeah, it's hard to conclude anything unless you do it properly. So I tried to go down that rabbit hole, and I heard some experts on Twitter, Professor, because that's where the top experts in the world always hang out. And the thought, so I read something, they said, oh, well, maybe nicotine decreases, and you know what I'm talking about, I don't, the ACE2 receptor, so the virus can't even get on the virus. And then I read something that nicotine increases ACE2 receptors, so the virus can't get on they can't get on the cell. And it's like, what is going on? So first, I've seen this word ACE2 or ACE2 a lot. Can you explain what that is, and then maybe the effect nicotine has on it one way or the other?
So ACE2 is a enzyme that's on many of our cells. It's stuck on the surface of the cell, and it's involved in regulating your blood pressure. You've probably heard of ACE, which is its cousin, where a lot of us take medications for high blood pressure, and they inhibit ACE. But ACE2, you don't want to inhibit. Actually, ACE2 is good for controlling blood pressure. And so any drugs would actually enhance ACE2, not inhibit it. So that's what ACE2 is. And it just so happens that the virus binds to this ACE2 to get into cells. It needs to do that to start an infection. I don't know what the effect of nicotine is on that, though. Sorry.
But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So ACE2 is good, but it's also what the virus uses to attach to the cells.
Yes, ACE2 is good. Well, they're all good. ACE is good too. It just so happens that you can get high blood pressure through it. So it's not meant to be I don't want people to think it's a bad protein, but it's there for a reason. Okay. ACE2 is beneficial in the sense that it regulates your blood pressure. But that happens that the virus has been evolving to bind to it. Yeah, that's what happens. Viruses attach to all these proteins we have on our cells that have good things, they have good functions, and the virus, that's the way they are. They're parasites, right?
Would you want to decrease ACE2 in order to make it harder for the virus to, obviously I'm an idiot talking here, but would you want to decrease ACE2 so it's harder for the virus to bind?
Yeah, that may have problems. That may cause your blood pressure to rise, right? So you probably don't want to do that.
Trade-offs.
There are other ways to prevent. The antivirals we talk about, they get in the cells and stop there. That's good enough. So you don't need to mess with ACE2. In general, you don't want to mess with a cell target. You want to hit the virus unless you're really sure that the cell target is okay. But I don't think ACE2 would be good to mess with.
Okay. I only got time for one more question, sir. I got a list here. Let's talk about trials, because everyone's very hopeful about different trials, and we see good news, bad news coming out, and headlines are ridiculous. And when we look at a trial, whether it's good news or bad news, what questions do we need to ask ourselves and learn more about before we can come to any real conclusion about them? And what are limitations of trials too, I should ask?
All right, so we're talking about human trials, and there are two kinds broadly, where first you have a drug, you want to make sure it's safe in people, right? You've tested it a lot in animals, and you know how much to give it to people, so you want to make sure it's safe. So it's called a phase 1, where you just say, if we give this to 100 people, are they okay? Do they have any weird things happening so that we don't want to use this? And so that's it. That's not an efficacy trial. You're not asking if the drug or the vaccine works. You just want to know if it's safe.
Oh, interesting.
So a lot of these new vaccines are going through phase 1. It takes about 2 months or so to get people enrolled, give them the drug or the vaccine, and then you watch them daily for some time. Okay.
Oh, you don't wait for like a year. It's not. You don't watch them for like a year to see. If
No. For a phase 1, just a few months to make, because the drug goes away after a month or so, and the vaccine is there transiently as well. So you don't need to watch them for a year. So that's phase 1. Then let's say you pass the phase 1, and some vaccines for SARS-CoV-2 are now in phase 1. And they should be ending, May, June. Then let's say it's safe. It's no problem in people at multiple doses. So then the next thing you ask, does it work for what you think it's supposed to do? Does it block infection if it's a vaccine? Does it reverse infection if it's an antiviral? So what do you do there? You have to have people who are infected, right? So for an antiviral, you could give it to patients who are infected. And you typically would do that in a hospital setting and see if it reduces infection, like have been done for remdesivir. Or the vaccine, you give it to people and say, go out into the world and I'll see you in a month. And then you see if they get infected and at what rate compared to people that don't have the vaccine, what we call the placebo. And for that, you need virus to be circulating and infecting people, right? So those kind of trials are not going to start till late summer, fall. And by then we might not have enough virus circulating to be able to test them. That's what we should look for.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Okay, I got to go, but this is not a fair question to ask you, especially in such a short time. What do you think we should do with letting people out and going back to normal from a virologist's perspective?
So looking at the numbers, looks like things are starting to slow down in terms of infections, and the hospitalizations are what we should look at because that's what we're trying to prevent. We want to see the numbers go down, and I think if in a 2-week period they keep going down, then you allow people to go back in phases, not all at once. Don't open everything at once, right? Of certain essential people in small numbers, taking precautions, maybe face masks, and you see what happens. You monitor infections, you monitor hospitalizations, you do it slowly, and I'm sure we can do it that way.
Okay, so you're kind of in a hopeful mode moving forward?
Oh, yeah,
or?
Totally. I'm very hopeful. I think people should realize soon we're going to start going back to life.
Okay, I like that. Great place to stop it for now. Professor Vincent Racaniello, Columbia University, podcast This Week in Virology. Professor, I feel so much better. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome. Good to talk to you.
Have a wonderful day. True story. Mike Slater, more coming up. Hey, Slater Crusaders, don't you feel so good? I feel so much better. I feel smarter. I feel more informed. Like the difference between watching CNN for 15 minutes and listening to Professor Racaniello for 15 minutes, you're going on 2 different trajectories of life. Like choose the path that you want to be. Right, we've talked a lot on the show about like choices. Your choices you make. It's not your identity that influences your choices. It's your choices that defines your identity. Like you choose who you want to be, what kind of person you want to be, what kind of news. We talk about curating the news. What kind of news consumer you want to be. And if you just want to put up with the crap at CNN and the mainstream news all day, like you're not going to be a good person. You're not going to be as complete and informed of a person as possible. And it is my vow to do as best as possible to bring the best sources and the best people here so that we leave being better people. Now, I say that, and I'm going to bookend this show with another example of how the media is awful and how just so we can put this to bed once and for all, and how they're going out of their way to make Trump look bad and I mean, we played the Rachel Maddow clip the other day of her almost rooting for the virus, rooting for remdesivir to not work, because then the president would look good, right? Our enemies could not do a better job of disinformation if they tried. So we kicked off the show with the whole drinking bleach fake news story. This whole model from our media started with the couple in Arizona who drank the fishbowl cleaner because it had HCQ in it. It didn't even have HCQ. Trump talked about HCQ, and the fish tank cleaner, among other ingredients, had chloroquine phosphate. It's not even the same thing. But by the way, I'm reading more of these stories now. Like that whole story made no sense to me. Like, why would people drink fish bowl cleaner? But apparently, I don't want to go on this whole thing because this is pure gossip. But apparently the guy who died was a mechanical engineer for John Deere, and he's being portrayed as an idiot. And the people who knew him was like, oh, he's like a super smart, normal guy. And apparently we may have a little Carol Baskin situation going on. That's all I'm saying, okay? I'm not gonna go any more into it, but maybe one day the media will come around and we'll find out, all you little cats and kittens, that there was some I vowed I would never say that. See what I'm becoming? See the choices I'm making? Why? Can we bring Professor back on? Can we get the Professor back on and save the show again? So that was the goofy story from the other day. Another one from last week was this whole story about Dr. Bright and how he was fired from Health and Human Services because he was against HCQ and he spoke out, what a hero, and he was fired because of it, because the Trump administration always silenced dissenters. He's a dictator. And it turned out this was over a year in the works for him to move from Health and Human Services to the NIH. It was over a year in the works. My favorite one, though, and this is just the end of this. Vanity Fair, I think we have the headline here. Not a joke, the Trump administration hired a dog breeder to run its coronavirus task force. But don't worry, Brian Harrison also has virtually no public health experience. It's the subheadline. Reuters has one too. Special report, Health and Human Services Chief has aide, former dog breeder, steer pandemic task force, okay? So what's the image you got in your head? First of all, it says dog breeder, but when I first read those headlines, I visualized dog walker. Now that's my fault, okay? I read dog walker, but either way, the point is to try to dismiss this guy as a nobody. Right? Brian Harrison is his name. He's worked in DC since 2005. A few years back, his wife's dad died, so they moved back to Texas, and they got out of government. They started breeding dogs as a hobby, and then it got into a business. The new head of Health and Human Services took over, wanted to hire him back to DC, and thought that heading this task force would be a good way to do it because he liked him. He thought he was a great person for government, good person for this job. They have a good relationship. He would do good. We got to get this guy back. Let's ask him back. And he said, all right, yeah, I'll do it. And that got spun into Trump hired a dog breeder. Imagine if you spent decades in whatever business you're in. You work for this company for decades, and you retire. All right, you retire from the company, and you move to Florida. You live the Florida retirement. You're living at the Villages, and a couple years later, the company's in big trouble, and they need you to come back. They say, how are we gonna fix this? Oh, let's call Charlie. Gotta call Charlie. Where's Charlie? Oh, he's in Florida. He's retired in Florida. Oh, we need him. Call him back. Get him back here. And they call you, and you reluctantly agree because you're like Cincinnatus, right? And you're like, I'll do it. Right? You're enjoying retired life, but you'll do this for the people. And you come back, and everyone in the office says, man, can you believe they hired some shuffleboard player? They just randomly called up some shuffleboard player to fix the company. We're doomed. And you're like, yeah, I mean, like now we play shuffleboard a lot, but you wouldn't call him a shuffleboard player. The guy's not an idiot. You called him for a reason. So that's what that story was. Trump hired dog breeder. I got another minute here. You know this term social distancing? I don't like it. I don't have a better idea. So I'm hesitant to complain about it because I don't have a solution. But I never liked the word. It never felt right, social distancing. It feels very Orwellian, doesn't it? Because there's nothing social about it. It's by its very nature anti-social. Humans thrive on social human contact and relationships, and that's not what this is. There's nothing social about it. So I don't like the word, never liked it. But it got me wondering the other day, where did it even come from? Where did this term social distancing come from? So here's the very short of the story. George Washington, remember back in 2005, we talked about this story a couple weeks ago. He read this book about the Spanish flu, and he went on this major, we got to prepare for a pandemic kick. And he called in one of his advisors at the Department of Homeland Security and said, hey guys, this happens once every 100 years, so we need to prepare for this. And George Bush became obsessive about this. So his Homeland Security people reached out to two doctors, Dr. Hatchett and Dr. Meeker. One of them reached out to a scientist friend who dealt with complex systems and complex system behavior and whatever. Turns out that scientist's 14-year-old daughter at the time was doing a class project where she mapped out all the different social networks in her high school in Albuquerque. Okay, I'm not making this up. Her dad was amazed at this project and how connected everyone in her school is, and the dad thought, geez, this would be a perfect system for a disease to spread because everyone's so connected. So the dad and daughter did some research together, and they ran through these models of, in a hypothetical town of 10,000 people, what would happen if school closed? And they concluded that 500 people would get sick, but if they kept the schools open, then 5,000 people would get sick. And in this project, they called it social distancing. No, I should say, the original term was protective sequestration. There you go. So I don't like social distancing just because it seems Orwellian, but protective sequestration, I don't like that either. It doesn't roll off the tongue. Protective sequestration. We're in a period of protective sequestration. You couldn't call it that. But that was the original term, protective sequestration. So anyway, the 14-year-old daughter worked with the dad worked with the doctors worked with the Department of Homeland Security, And Department of Homeland Security brought it up through the ranks of government. It was brought up through the Bush government, initially rejected by everyone. Then it got accepted 2007. Updated throughout the Obama years. It did a 5-year review during Obama. It was finalized in 2017 and put in the plan. And this is the plan that was taken off the shelf when this pandemic happened. And people are wondering, what do we do? Well, what's the plan say? Well, who made the plan? Some 14-year-old girl. No, I don't mean that disparaging. I'm not like, oh, some dumb girl. Like, it's just interesting to know the genesis of that. I'm not saying it's even wrong. It's just who would have thunk that it was all mostly inspired by 14-year-old girl's science project. So the abbreviated version, George W. Bush reached out to doctors, who reached out to a scientist whose 14-year-old daughter did a high school science project and came up with this idea of social distancing. Finally put into federal guidelines officially in 2017. And that became our off-the-shelf guideline on what to do. And here we are. Who would have thunk it? All right, Slater Crusaders, we're going to, I don't want to do any more media's awful stuff. Totally get it out of your brain, get it out of your heart. Don't watch it anymore. Get it out of your life. Do it for a week. If you've never done it before, get it out of your life for a week and see how you feel. You will feel better. Garbage in, garbage out. So no more media's awful stuff. I'm not going to do that anymore because we're not going to pay attention to it anymore. It's completely irrelevant. We're only going to focus on what we know, what we're figuring out, and hopefully we can get to the truth with more people like Professor Rackaniel. True story. Mike Slater. See you tomorrow. Spread the word.